All right. Welcome, everyone, to the first program in the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art's Global Religions of Africa series, sponsored by the Lilly Endowment. My name is Michael Baird, and I am an education and curatorial assistant at the museum. This series, occurring throughout the months of May, June, and July, is part of a larger project exploring religion and spirituality with scholars, practitioners, and communities. Over the coming weeks, you will hear from a lot of scholars, some of whom will be discussing localized stories that are continents away from Washington, D.C. These accounts are undoubtedly important to understanding religious practice, but they are only one part of the story. That is why today we thought it would be important to begin our series with Reverend Tony Lee, a scholar, practitioner, and religious leader from our own local community, who will discuss the role and power of religious practice in the present moment of the global pandemic. This series is the beginning of a new initiative at our museum to focus on the lived experience of religion, to animate the objects in our museum with the context, the music, the rituals, the everyday uses that add to their value, and to include as a topic of conversation the objects of spiritual value in everyday lives. We want to become a platform where artists and all members of our local and global communities can contend with the ways in which spirituality touches their lives. This series of programs will not only increase awareness, but also model respectful dialogue as we begin this new era of engagement with our communities and their spiritual landscape. We encourage self-expression and empathy, and we enter the discussion with the understanding that there is more that unites us as a community than divides us. Since the COVID-19 global pandemic began, religious institutions and individuals have been challenged to respond to these earthly concerns. Tonight, Reverend Tony Lee will be speaking on his experiences of leading a congregation through the COVID-19 pandemic, the integration of technology into worship and communication, and how beliefs and practices have responded to this period of physical distancing. Reverend Lee is the founder and senior pastor of the Community of Hope AME Church in Hillcrest Heights, Maryland. Community of Hope is recognized throughout the region for its innovative ministry, social engagement, and community outreach. Community of Hope has also gained national recognition for its work around HIV/AIDS, violence prevention, community police partnerships, and educational advocacy. The church's work is highlighted in the documentary The Gospel of Healing, and Reverend Lee is a contributor in the books Being a Black Man, At the Corner of Progress and Peril, and Reach, 40 Black Men Speak on Living, Loving, and Succeeding. Reverend Lee serves as the board chair for the nonprofit Community Builders, convener for the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation's Black Male Initiative, member of the Board of Visitors for the Howard University School of Divinity, and is also an HIV ambassador for the NAACP. He is an on-air radio personality and can be heard in the DC area on CBS Radio's WPGC 95.5 FM. Reverend Lee holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Maryland at College Park and a Master's of Divinity degree from the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. We will wrap up the program tonight with a period for questions. At any point during Reverend Lee's talk or after, please feel free to type questions into the question box on the bottom of your screen. We will select some of those that we received to cover at the end. And I would now like to turn it over to Reverend Lee.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I'm grateful for all the hard work you've done to pull this together. And I also want to thank all those with your team and the team over there at the Smithsonian, Sister Quanice and everyone, and we're just grateful for how you pulled that together. And thank you so much once again for your hard work. That because this is a part of the Global Religions of Africa speaker series, I feel it is fine for me to be able to start out of my religious tradition in a word of prayer, to be able to start this moment, to center myself, to be able to share. God, we're grateful for this time together. We're grateful for your hand and for your power. Now bless these words that are shared. Let the words of my mouth, the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. Oh Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. So my brothers and my sisters, my honor and privilege once again to be here, Smithsonian, to be here with the National Museum of African Art and for such a wonderful period of conversation. I've been asked to be able to share about sharing religious leadership in this time of COVID-19 during this coronavirus time period. And in that, I think it's important for me to share a context for the church. I am the pastor of the Community of Hope AME Church, which is located right outside of Washington, D.C. in Prince George's County, Maryland, in southern Prince George's County, Maryland. Community of Hope is now 14 years old. We turned 14 in April. And we started in a nightclub. So we were a church that started in a fully functioning a party all night on Saturday night nightclub, and we would have church on Sunday. It was a nightclub in which actually they would have strip nights on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So it was a nightclub / strip club, but we turned it into a space for worship, and we were there for a while. Then we moved to a mall up the street, the Iverson Mall, and most recently we had moved and have been holding worship in the former Crystal Skating Rink, or the Skate Palace in the skating rink. So in all of that, church that has grown from 7 initial members to a little bit over 2,000 members, and have been blessed to be able to share in this region. In that, this coronavirus, COVID-19, has shifted a few things. And I've been asked to talk about a couple of those. One, I've been asked to talk about the integration of technology in the worship and how things shifted as far as with our technology. Now, we have been blessed to always, since our very beginning, to be streaming our worship services. So we always had worship online. But what this whole shelter in place did for us is, of course, it made that very central to us. And what we did was, instead of doing our live worship, we ended up going into a TV studio, a fully functioning TV studio. And so we've been shooting our worship in the TV studio, but we have not been shooting it as worship experience because we wanted our teams to be able to not have to come out and them to be able to be with their families and shelter in place. And so we have shot in the TV studio some of our senior staff as a TV show. And so that has been a shift for us. It still has worship. We play clips from our worship services that we play, that myself and our assistant pastor, Reverend Bill Lee, we sit and we do messages there in TV studio. And we have various segments. Sometimes they can be interview segments, etc. But we have shifted that. And that's been one of the ways that technology has shifted into worship. But one of the other things for us is that we believe that worship isn't just what happens on Sunday, but worship is what happens all week long. And so in the midst of our weekly worship experiences, we have various times in which we come together on Zoom, and for many of our discipleship pieces, that we're grateful that we have a partnership with the American Heart Association. And in that partnership, we had already been doing training about heart literacy and health literacy. And our executive pastor, Reverend Dr. Nancy Lee, had been very central in that, and their team had been doing that. So we shifted that from folks coming to the church to being able to do that on Zoom. And so we're averaging about 60 to 70 folks a week who are coming on Zoom to be able to get heart literacy, because we believe that it's not just about taking care of people spiritually. We believe that our religious practice is holistic, and so it's taking care of our mental, our physical, and our spiritual and emotional health. And so they've been able to navigate that. We've also been blessed that our men's ministry, our women's ministry, our youth ministry have been having Zoom. Our young people have been able to catch up and stay connected to our folks on Zoom. They've also been able to present different kinds of videos through TikTok, etc., for some of our worship experiences online and some of our TV worship experiences. One major story that was a major blessing to us was that we had a member who had tested positive and who was in ICU as a result of having COVID-19. This young brother Curtis Johnson, was in the hospital in ICU on a respirator. But yet for our men's meeting that they would have on Tuesday nights, the men were meeting on Zoom, and they were having one of their men's meetings. And Brother Curtis, from his hospital room in ICU, with the respirator over his face, would tune into the men's meeting because he wanted the encouragement, he wanted the prayer, he wanted the fellowship. I believe that is one of the ways that technology has been integral, that we've been looking at the ways to connect technology to the work that we are doing, but also to connect technology to the ways that we can stay connected as community. One of the other things we've done is we have what we call the Community of Hope Check on 5 initiative. And that's basically, we ask our members that during the week to just check on 5 folks, whether it's family members or co-workers or loved ones, or neighbors, etc., but digitally or by phone, etc., to check on 5 folks just to make sure that folks are doing all well. And that is one of the ways we're also able to stay connected as community. Now, one of the things that we realized, though, was that for us, when I went to seminary at Union Theological Seminary, they taught us all of these ologies: theology and pneumatology and eschatology and soteriology. And I could give all those definitions, but there's one ology that really stuck out for me, and that was ecclesiology. And ecclesiology is basically the study of the church, the study of the Christian church. That what is the church? And one of the things that we have been fortunate to do in the close of the year is that we had done a series called Finish Strong. And in that series, we dealt with ecclesiology, this concept of what is the church. And in dealing with this concept of what is the church, that we stated very strong that the church is not the 4 walls. The church is not the building. The church is the people. And so we would coin a phrase that we would always say that we don't go to church, we are the church. And I believe this ecclesiological framework was what has helped us to be able to weather the storm in this periods of sheltering in place, because we've been very clear as a congregation that we're not the building, but the church is the people. And if we stay connected, then that ecclesiological kind of understanding is able to be what helps along. Now, I believe, though, also during this season, we've had what I call an ecclesiological epiphany. That as we understood ourselves to be the body of believers, and we've always been a body of believers that has had a hard focus on outreach and a hard focus on taking care of people and a hard focus on working with the community and focusing in community, whether it was our work that has gotten national attention, whether it's our work around HIV and AIDS, or whether our work around educational advocacy, or whether our work around police partnerships, or our work around violence, whether that is community violence or violence of police against community and fighting against that. And that in the midst of all of that work, or whether even our food insecurity work, that what we realized is we had a very hard focus on taking care of our community and being there for our community. And the blessing was that during this season, that did not stop, but it accelerated. If you look at what's been happening in our community, a great need has arisen, especially around the areas of food insecurity in Prince George's County, Maryland. And so in our metro area, we had folks who just really had significant needs and were living food insecure. And so we just tried to focus very hard on how could we help meet the need. And so we shaped what we call our Bread of Hope initiative. And our Bread of Hope initiative was an initiative that was shaped to be able to meet needs, physical and emotional. Physical needs, whether that was food or whether that was masks or whether that was even toilet paper, that we've attempted to be able to meet those kinds of needs. And so since this shelter in place has gone forward, that we found ourselves giving away groceries at Iverson Mall. And we've been giving those away on Sundays. We've shaped partnership with the Prince George's County, the county executive, Angela Also Brooks, and her team, and World Central Kitchen with Jose Andres, and been giving away prepackaged meals with them. And so since the shelter in place has started, we've been able to have been blessed to give away 2,100 boxes of groceries, over 4,500 prepackaged meals, over 20,000 surgical masks, and over 12,000 rolls of toilet paper. It has been us attempting to be there. And what we learned and what our ecclesiological epiphany was that as we sat there, we decided we did not want to have those giveaways during the week or on Saturdays, but we wanted to do them on Sundays as a part of what we considered our church service. And so on Sundays at 8, 10, and 12, you could be watching church service online. You could watch it on our website, which is hiphopenation.com. You could watch it on our Facebook Live platform. You could watch it in our YouTube page live. You could watch it at 8, 10, and 12. But also what would be happening is while church service was going on, that we would be serving, whether it's these groceries, or we would be serving and giving away these surgical masks for free on Sunday morning at 10 as well. And we realized that it was a blessing to be in service online and of service in community at the same time. And for us, that just has shaped something that for us, it's causing us to realize that even when we go back, that we're still going to be needing to do this continual services, worship services, while serving in community at the same time. Up to this point, we've served in community on different days in the week, but for us, we really have felt this burden and this collection to be able to serve all at the same time. Now, one of the things I was asked to kind of deal with was kind of how this all connects to African culture, African American culture, and how this connects to religious culture. And one of the things that I've realized is that I cannot talk about what's happening at Community of Hope without shaping it within the context of Community of Hope being an AME church. We're the Community of Hope AME church, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And being a part of the Black church, we cannot understand our role in this moment as religious institution if we do not understand what's happening in the African American community in the United States. If you look in the United States, the African American community is disproportionately dying and being infected by the coronavirus and by this COVID-19. And so these disproportionate numbers of African Americans dying or the disproportionate numbers of African Americans being infected are often as a result of disproportionate or issues around health disparities, issues around class, issues around social location. And so what that does is that impacts even how we have to shape our response as an institution. We find ourselves being able to hearken back to the old school role, the historic role of the Black church, that invisible institution that has always been there for African Americans. The Black church has not just been the place to come on Sunday to worship, but it's been the place of activism. It's been the place of safety. It's been the place of shelter. It's been the place of organizing. It's been the place that helped communities stay vibrant and help communities live. It's been the place of education, and it's been the place of dissemination of all kinds of things that were needed for community. And so we find ourselves walking in that same kind of tradition, understanding that our response could not just be general, but had to deal with the specificity of our community. Prince George's County is predominantly African American, and so therefore our response needed to be one that is focusing on that community. It was a need for us to be able to Bishop Walter Thomas, I heard him say one time, to be able to pivot in midair, to be able to utilize technology, to be able to utilize our resources, to be able to utilize our connections, to pivot in midair, to be able to then help those that are around us. And so we've shaped partnerships with the business community. We have a for-profit, a government contractor, Team Gov, that we've partnered with. We've partnered with nonprofits. We're blessed to have partnered with Dreams Work of CDC and the church, shaping a faith, a nonprofit and for-profit collaboration to come together and try to meet the needs of not just Prince George's County, but we've also been doing work and assisting our brothers in Southeast DC. And so we find ourselves navigating those things and utilizing, whether it's technology, whether it's our resources, whether it's our collaborations to help to do all of that. One of the other things that you see and how technology has allowed us to be able to work, to be able to be pastoral, is our assistant pastor, Reverend Bill Lee, received some regional attention, and the news covered him for the work he has done with what he has called the Meet Me Outside campaign. That Reverend Bill Lee, who's our assistant pastor, and he preaches on our Sunday services, and is my brother, that he is also a photographer, a phenomenal photographer. He has done the book cover for Vernon Jordan and album covers for significant gospel artists, etc. And he decided that during this shelter in place that he wanted to do something that could share hope, and a sense of hope and a sense of inspiration with people. And so what he did was he put the word out that he would go in his car doing social distancing, and the people could come to their front porch and he would take a picture of the families from their cars. And then he would ask them, what's something that you're hopeful for? And he has been able to take the pictures of about 300 families during this time of sheltering in place. And he's been able to be a source of inspiration, but also a source of hope. And his imagery, as we're dealing with this kind of the Museum of African Art, his imagery was a way of him using his art form, his creativity, his sense of culture, photography, to be able to tell the story of what's happening with all these folks who are sheltering in place. It's beautiful when you see the various types of pictures he has, the various families and the way families look and the way families are with each other, that you see babies who are just brought home after being sick in the hospital, and their parents wanted to take a picture with them coming back home from the hospital. You see family members whose loved ones had been dealing with cancer and were fighting cancer, and on the other side of cancer, and they're taking these pictures of celebration. And so you see these wonderful pictures of hope. And so I was excited to be able to see how Reverend Bill Lee was able to take his creativity, his gift, his art form, and the technology of digital photography, and to be able to use that to be pastoral in nature. It was a way for him as a pastor to pastor the region. So he didn't just go to Community of Hope churches. He went to churches throughout the region and was just sharing this love and sharing this very kind gesture, this gracious gesture, this free taking of a picture, allowing people to get out of their head and just come to the front of their house even for a moment. And I think that was another way that we saw a very creative way of navigating things. I think that it's important as we talk about even African art and we talk about culture for us to remember that we do not have to stick with the dichotomy of the sacred and the profane. And one of the challenges, oftentimes we get so caught up in the sacred and the profane, or with the sacred and the secular, that we end up missing the larger understanding and the larger view of how we can have impact during seasons like these. And what we found with Reverend Bill, what we found at Community of Hope, is that we believe the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That for those who will get caught up in the sacred and the profane, that's this understanding that there's some stuff that's for the church, there's some stuff that's religious, and there's some stuff that's for the world, and that the two shall not come together. But what we've come to understand is that we believe that the church should be wherever the people are, and that we can have impact wherever we are, and that we can utilize every tool, we can utilize music, we can utilize art, we can utilize culture to be able to share the hope and the love of Christ to God's people. And so whether it's Reverend Bill, whether it's the work we've been doing with our TV stuff, whether it's the work we've been doing with the Bread of Hope, it has been trying to understand and show folks that you don't have to be inside of a church to be the church, but wherever you are as a Christian, you are the church, and the church is right there. And so that's been a blessing for us during this season, is realizing that even what we're doing is a very African spiritual cosmology. It's this cosmology that allows us to understand that we can be who we are, what we are, and do how we do it. And it's all unto God, right in any place that we are located and right wherever we're situated. And that's why one of the other things that we've done around shaping community is that we have been blessed to see how the church members and how folks have been coming together and what we call these drive-by celebrations. And then my mother yesterday turned 81 years old, and as she turned 81 years old, what we did was we did two things. One, we utilized technology to allow folks to come together as congregation to be a blessing to her, but also to express their appreciation for her ministry and her love for them. And there was an app called VidHug. This app is an app in which that you can have people upload, you can have them upload technologically videos. And as they upload videos, they can tell the person how much they care about them, how much they love them. And then the app will pull things together and to be able to make it into some kind of a presentation or a longer term video. And so with the app VidHug, what we found was that she ended up having a video that was almost 25 minutes long of people giving 30-second to 1 minute expressions of love and gratitude, about 30-second expressions of gratitude and love. That's a way of utilizing technology to keep people plugged in and connected. But the other thing is that we were blessed to be able to do a drive-by celebration for her. What we did was we did social distancing, and we acted as if we were having a surprise dinner for her in her driveway, keeping her and my father socially distanced from the rest of us. And as we did that, we have had a DJ on the sidewalk who was socially distanced, and he was playing his music, etc. And then as the dinner was halfway through, all of a sudden, all of these cars we had connected through social media and through all of our communications platforms to connect with our church members to assemble. And they made their way down the street, honking their horns and celebrating her. And as they did that, what you were able to see was that even though the church is not able to come together at church, we're still able to be there together with each other in celebration along these special moments. That my mother's was not the only drive-by. We had a young man, Javante, who was graduated, and we've done social distancing, a drive-by for him as well. But there are all these kinds of ways in which we've been able to stay as community while being able to stay healthy and well. One of the last things I want to talk about briefly is that even as we are sitting here reflecting on what we've been able to do, I believe that one of the larger challenges for the church in this season is not going to be how does the church interact as church right now, but what do we do when it's time to go back? What do we do when it's time to go back? And I'm not talking about a rushing to go back, because we're not rushing to go back. I know that they're opening up a lot of states, but our church is really focused on the safety of people. And so we're not in a great rush to go back. But the reality is that the communities we go back to are going to be very different than when we left. And so I'm not even talking about how the churches are shaping their worship. I'm not even talking about, and that will be very different, that how we shape our worship is going to be very different, that how we interact with each other is going to be very different, that even how we hold our services will be very different. But I'm saying that we are going to have to shape church differently, not just for what we do on Sunday, but what we've shaped all week long. The churches are going to be the places, especially in the African-American community, that are going to be the places that are going to be the safety net, that with all the jobs that have been lost, with all of the industries that are being shifted, with all of the businesses that are going to be having challenges, there's going to be the need for the church to be able to stand up and step out. Churches are going to be places that are needed around mental health issues, and churches are going to end up needing to pull together mental health centers, or at least be spaces in which mental health experts can come and do support groups and those kinds of things, and counseling, because people coming out of this are going to be dealing with all kinds of mental health kinds of challenges. Churches are going to have to be dealing with a substance abuse in ways that we haven't dealt with them before, as a result of people having been shut in and not been able to get to their groups in the ways they have. Churches are going to have to, in even higher ways, we've been dealing with a lot of these things, but even higher ways of navigating what it means to deal with our brothers and our sisters who have been dealing with domestic abuse, because what we have witnessed right now and the reports we're getting is that many of the situations that we would have heard about and been able to move on have not been heard about, because people are shut in with their abusers. We're going to have to deal with and be focusing on how to deal with the vulnerabilities of our children, because many statistics are showing that many of the reports of child abuse are down because those people in those spaces where it could be noticed are not able to see the children or deal with children anymore. And our children are going to be coming back some from having to deal with their abusers. Our churches are going to have to be places that deal with workforce development, that if you're looking at workforce development, is going to be very different than it has been, because one of the challenges of workforce development is what does it mean to try to give people training for jobs that aren't even there now. We know that our economy has lost so many jobs, and so there's going to be the need for us to be able to do some thinking about what does workforce development look like, what does entrepreneur training look like, what does it look like for us to be able to pull together opportunities for communities in which opportunities seem to be so fleeting, that our churches are going to have to be these centers. Our churches are going to have to be education centers. That we're not sure what the schools are going to look like, and our churches may need to be the places in which there are safe spaces for homeschooling types of opportunities or distance learning opportunities. Our churches are going to have to be those places to be able to navigate all of those kinds of things, so that our communities and our people can be safe and uplifted. In other words, the church is going to have to be center of community. Well, the wonderful thing is that's what the church has been. I would argue that's what the church still is. And I would argue that that's what you're seeing right now, because churches all over the nation are stepping up to the call that I can name churches all over this region, whether it's the Ebenezer AME Church or the Kingdom Fellowship AME churches or the St. Stephen's Baptist Church. I mean, there are churches, or the Zion Baptist. I can name churches all over our region that are I can name churches all over this nation that have just been on the front lines taking care of community, making sure that people are taken care of. There's going to be a need for us to not just think about triage and helping people to get through the emergency and people getting stabilized, but we're going to have to start thinking about institution building and what that looks like, that shapes the institution of church differently. That it cannot be, the institution of church cannot just be about worship in a place where people come, but people are going to be coming for much more than they've been coming for. And the church will need to be prepared institutionally and structurally and systematically, having the systems in place to be able to help to make sure that the needs of people are taken care of and this community is better. And so my brothers and my sisters, I thank you for this time of sharing. I thank you, my great thanks to the Smithsonian, to the Museum, National Museum of African Art, to Michael, to Sister Quanice, and all those who allowed me to share just some of my humble thoughts during this moment. As I go, I do want to say this one last thing. I believe that in this moment, we have the opportunity to really, in a significant way, allow as a church, as Christianity, religious community, to let this world feel the power of Jesus Christ and lives be changed, never to be the same again. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that very insightful conversation. I think you're certainly right on a number of points. I think, this tendency that we have to divide not only between the sacred and the secular, but also between religion and science and religion and technology, that there's kind of this popular conception, originating really out of the Enlightenment, that these are not compatible with each other. But you clearly demonstrated that's not how religion actually works on the ground. And even though that's not necessarily what, as a museum or as scholars, we traditionally contend with, that's not how lived religious experience actually works. So thank you so much, especially for that point. I thought that was very interesting. We do have a couple questions if you still have time for that.
Yeah, I have plenty of time.
All right, wonderful. So one question we have is, how can museums work with churches to support communities?
So, and I think there are a couple of ways. One, I think that museums are very helpful in telling stories and shaping the history. And I think that the history and the stories of people are important. And so, because I think in the history, you're able to see that what is happening now is connected to a much broader stream. And so I think that museums weren't able to share in the history. A good example, say with I have a great memories and thoughts of the National Museum of African Art because when I was at Ebenezer AME Church as a youth minister, we were actually in that museum. That you all did an exhibit on African-centered rites of passage. And in that, you looked at African-centered rites of passage, and you had an exhibit about some of the rites of passage programs here in the United States. And the rites of passage program we had at Ebenezer AME Church, you all had highlighted in the museum. It was a way of showing how there was a continuity between rites of passage in Africa and what was happening in the United States, and even how the churches were connecting to it. So I think that kind of piece can be helpful because it was a connection between the history, but also the present. And I believe you have these connections, and I believe museums can help us to see those connections and be able to see in a larger way those things that are still happening that are helping the world.
I definitely agree, and that is what we're trying to do, especially with this kind of new institutional initiative, is to really look at the ways in which there is contemporary relevance, especially to what we consider the traditional, the classical objects, the art objects that we have in our museum, and how those are relevant to contemporary worship all across the diaspora and in our Washington, D.C. communities. All right, we have another question regarding how do you think that religion has helped people to make sense of what is occurring in the world right now?
So I think a couple of things. One, um, and I don't think we always totally have things totally make sense. I do think that religion and myself as a Christian pastor, that we hope that it helps us navigate even some situations that don't seem to make sense. I think that faith is that which helps us grapple with the grays, that sometimes things make sense and sometimes things are easy to be able to navigate and so I can easily be able to try to say, oh, your faith can get you through. But for that mother that we had to deal with whose son, whose 12-year-old died of cancer and she couldn't have a full funeral for him, how do I attempt to make sense of that? I can't make sense of it, but I can help her find comfort in navigating it. And I believe that our faith can help us understand that we're not in this by ourselves, that even as we're in this, and I believe that our faith helps us to understand that not just that God is in this with us, that Christ is in this with us, but in faith that we're in this with each other. And so as the body of believers, as the church, and the church not just being the place you go, but the church being the body of believers, then when your church wraps their arms around you, then that helps you navigate some of these hard times. It helps you navigate some of these hard questions. It helps you grapple with the fact. The other thing I think that is important, though, especially from a Western society, is that it helps us to understand the scriptures talk about how it rains on the just and the unjust. That hard times come to everybody, and that we are not exempt sometimes because we're in the United States, we think we're exempt from trials and tribulations and very hard things when really people throughout the world in other situations have had to learn what it's like to live with little for a long time. And so it helps us also to have a greater sense of compassion for even those who are in other situations, because we start to understand ourselves more in a global context instead of just kind of in a self-centered me, myself, and I'm in the first world kind of a context. And so I think in that, it strengthens our faith, it broadens our faith, and it allows us to take a pause. I think in that it allows us to reflect and meditate upon what may God be trying to say to us in these moments that can help us to be better individually and collectively.
Thank you very much. We have another question that just popped up. So someone was wondering if you could possibly speak for a moment about the kind of interfaith engagement that you're doing with religious communities beyond, for example, the Christian faith. And do you believe that this kind of interfaith dialogue and initiatives are important?
So I do feel that the interfaith work is important. I do feel that interfaith dialogue is significant. In the midst of this moment, so we have done a lot of work previously, especially around our violence work with the mosque in our area, and have been, especially with our violence work, have just been intricately linked and connected in that type of work. And so that's been the work. That's been the largest areas of work. A lot of my other interfaith work has also been in the work we do around social justice stuff. I'm on the board of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. And so we engage in those spaces, as well as my work on the board at Howard University School of Divinity. And so Howard University School of Divinity, while being a Christian seminary, also has a whole stream in Islam, and has not just Christian, but also has Muslim worship services for the students, etc. And so and my works in those kinds of areas as well are the ways I've been able to do some of the interfaith work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have a couple more questions, if that's all right. So one person is talking about the historic use of Christianity in particular, but other religions that have been used to justify crimes against humanity. In particular, this individual mentioned hurting people of African descent, for example, through involuntary enslavement. And they were wondering if you could speak about your understanding of that and your interpretation of that.
So I think that if you look at one of the challenges of religion, or one of the challenges of folks trying to serve God, is that oftentimes people have done a disservice to God by trying to shape God in their own image, or trying to shape God, or trying to use religion to justify their greed, to justify their bad practices and their bad acting. And so oftentimes religions throughout history have been utilized in certain ways to either justify wars, to justify tearing people down, to justify. And so I believe that that is something that all religions have to look at, grapple with, navigate head on. But I don't think that that has to invalidate the religious expression, because I believe on the other side of that, those same religions have been utilized to be able to lift up humanity and push forward humanity. I do think, though, that the challenge comes when there's a great challenge when people attempt to utilize their religious perspective in a way to shape a sense of superiority, and whether it's a superiority in action, a superiority economically, a superiority in business. I mean, so we can see that around the slave trade. We can see that just in different areas around the way people have been treated, etc. And so for me, I believe in reclaiming. I don't believe that because someone used it wrongly, that invalidates the very foundation of what it is. And I believe it's important to be able to understand that, so that you can move in the power of all that it is, but also acknowledge the ways in which it's been used to hurt people, and to be able to then rectify or even repent of the sins of generations.
Thank you so much. And we have time for one last question here. So someone asked, is there a difference between religion and faith?
So we have to. So I would argue. I would say that religion is a construct out of which much stuff is able to be kind of connected. So faith, I can have faith in all kinds of stuff. I actually have faith in this chair I'm sitting in right now. To sit in, I'm having faith that whoever built it on that day was really focused, etc., so that it won't fall. I'm having faith right now. I had faith, and God have mercy, during this season, we've been having a heck of a lot of faith on the internet, because I'm having faith that this internet provider is going to work and keep this stream going, so that I can actually be able to keep things moving, etc. And so faith is just kind of now the religion. So for me, Christianity is a religion, but the religion is a way of just codifying the many of those beliefs and those belief systems into kind of a systematized kind of thing. And so whether it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, etc., those religions are basically pulling together those faith traditions, whether it is the traditions, whether it is the writings, whether it is the belief systems, etc., and bringing some kind of systems to those. Now, the challenge in that is that anytime you systematize something, and we know this from corporations, you can often make it bureaucratic. And systems can be utilized and go in different directions in the original kind of a belief system. And so there's the need to always make sure in navigating that. The challenge in just saying, not the challenge, faith by itself ends up being something you can have in anything and in any kind of a way, and it ends up becoming very nebulous without some kind of a history to connect it to, without some kind of sense of traditions to connect it to, or without some kind of systems in place, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
That makes total sense. Yeah. No, thank you so much, Reverend Lee, for your time tonight and for this wonderful talk. And thank you to everyone who was able to tune in. Please join us next week on Tuesday, the 26th at the same time, 6 p.m. for a conversation with Dr. Sheila Walker, who will be discussing expressions of spirituality throughout the African diaspora, especially the Americas. And be sure to check our social media at NMAFA on Twitter and Instagram, and at si.africanart on Facebook for updated schedules and links to upcoming activities and programs. Everyone stay safe and stay well, and see you on Tuesday, hopefully.